Good morning, everyone. Justin Wood from the Authority. I guess I'm the lead person responsible for the design at the Authority. So my session, I'm just going to give, it's not quite high level, but a reasonably brief overview of where we think we're at with the design, summarise the feedback we've been given by you through submissions. And I guess just to stress at this point, this is a combination of the Authority and the system operators' view of the world and what we intend to recommend to the Authority Board, but they make the final decision, and so any or all of this could change. So after considering submissions, we think the best way to describe it is that most of the core design elements of the real-time pricing proposal have been upheld, either because they were fairly strongly supported, or even if there were queries or concerns, in our view, they haven't caused us to change that underlying proposal. In contrast, a few areas have been reworked or reconsidered, and I guess the most prominent one would be the pricing error claim, or the way we're going to deal with pricing errors. That was quite clear that most people thought, well, why are you saying just manual? Why don't you automate as much as possible? So we've run with that, and Murray, I think, will be giving you an update on where that's landed a little later. And a couple of other aspects have been deferred. We want to take a secondary or a supplementary consultation probably after the board has made the decision to sort of start the build process for the main, what we're saying is core design, and I'll explain what those are in a minute. Or actually right now. There's a few of these design elements, either the element itself or some of the detail that attach to that, which we think are not core, which means we can start to build real-time pricing and work out these little details along the way, and that won't delay the build process. So for example, for the most part, it was broadly supported to apply these default scarcity pricing values as a critical component of how we actually deliver real-time pricing. But a few people raised questions around, are these values still right? So to be clear, that's the current lower band of $10,000 and up to $20,000 in the code. Are those values still right? Will they still be right by the time we go live in about mid-2021? And should there be some process stipulated in the code for reviewing them periodically? So we're going to take that, well, we're proposing to take those questions to secondary consultation, because from the market system's point of view, they're just numbers that you plug in as a parameter. So we can spend some time hashing that out. Now, the ones I've got marked there in red, we're going to cover that today. So it is technically some of the detail about how we implement it, but obviously it's pretty fundamental, is how exactly do we deal, or what prices come into play when we're dealing with reserve shortfalls in the context of sacrificing some reserve cover to avoid load shedding. Possibly a question around the materiality threshold for upholding a pricing error, and I'll be going through later how people responded to our proposal for a dispatch light, a dispatchable demand light. As I say, some other aspects we've reworked and reconsidered in light of your submissions. The most prominent one is we've modified our approach to pricing errors. Again, the ones in red we'll be talking through today. We've also investigated in quite some detail, but at this point not modified our proposal for how we deal with high spring washer pricing situations, and what would happen in the case of market system outages, or I guess more to the point, some more information and elaboration on why those market system outages are actually happening. Now I'm going to go through summarising submissions and across these three categories, so those areas that were, for the most part, broadly supported as they were originally proposed, some areas where there were some questions or queries raised, and a couple of aspects that were not well supported, or submissions raised some good suggestions for change. The first one then, that real-time pricing will itself be derived from the system operator's real-time dispatch schedule. So that's, as we said, the fundamental principle is that prices should be based on the process that the system operator uses to actually run the power system. So those dispatch prices will be struck each time the system operator issues dispatch instructions in real time within the trading period. So this is the pivotal way that we're going to achieve that actionability and improve the price certainty and actually the accuracy for the prices that apply for trading periods. Then the interim price, or the spot price for a 30-minute trading period, will be based on the time-weighted average of those dispatch prices issued and critically visible on WITs in the trading period. So to clarify, these dispatch prices would apply from the moment they're visible on WITs, and that means that there can be circumstances where they may have been issued by the system operator, dispatch instructions have gone out, but for whatever reason they're not visible on WITs, so they won't count. And they'll be good until they're replaced by a new dispatch price, which will happen at the absolute least once every 30-minute trading period. Broad agreement to disestablish the pricing manager. Oh, I meant to say at the start of this. So the way I've characterised this is obviously a summary. Now, I'm not trying to suggest that everyone agreed with every aspect. So we will be responding to some of those that didn't agree with some of these elements in our very detailed decision paper. So the pricing manager would be disestablished and the clearing manager would be calculating interim prices. We would, as proposed, assign these default scarcity pricing values to all unbid demand in those 3-stepped blocks. At the moment it's 5% at $10,000, an intermediate 15% at $15,000, and the remaining 80% at $20,000. So in working through submissions, it's clear that there are still some misunderstandings out there. So we really want to emphasise that those of you who are non-conforming loads and currently required to bid your expected consumption, you don't have to do anything. We are not changing the process around that. There's no change to your compliance or any other rights or obligations. It's exactly the same as it is today. In the proposal, we said that we would assign a proxy price to disconnected nodes, so nodes that are taken out for maintenance or something along those lines. For the most part, and we said we would base that on a historical load factor of that disconnected node relative to some reference node. Since then, the system operators looked at that again, and they now think it's viable to use the price of the electrically nearest actual live node, and we'll explain that in more detail in the decision paper. Generally speaking, there's broad agreement to continue to partially relax reserve cover before instructing emergency load shedding in the event that there would otherwise be an energy shortfall. We will move to calculating or forecasting conforming load using a bottom-up process where the grid owner's ion meters will be the primary data input. And a few submitters requested that we give more clarity on exactly how that forecast process will work. So the system operator has undertaken to publish their procedures to help explain that. And just to emphasise, that's the short-term load forecast. So this is just looking forward to the next roughly 5 minutes. We're not talking about the load forecast that is used to form the forecast schedules, so the PRS, the NRS, etc. Dispatchable demand will move from where it is now dispatched ahead of time from the NRS to being dispatched along with generation as part of the real-time dispatch schedule. And again, DD is one of those areas where it seems there's still some work for us to do to help explain what it's for, how it works. So we're very much going to undertake, develop some guidance materials, education, find a way to better explain that. So for example, you don't really have to wade through all the code clauses yourselves. Rebidding and reoffering within the trading period, electronically rebidding and reoffering from WITs will be enabled. And to stress, that's under the same restrictions as today, so it has to be a bona fide or under a grid emergency notice. Constrained payments will be calculated using the last good offer or bid within the trading period. We will retain a pricing error process. In the event of a market system outage, prices will fall back to using the PRS, the price responsive schedule. And we have elaborated on that as part of looking at the pricing error process, so we might cover that later. The forward schedules would be aligned with the dispatch schedules, which really just means they'll be using the same inputs, although calculated, they'd still be calculated for that 30-minute average. The loss and constraint excess would be apportioned from the dispatch schedules. We'll be turning off those current ex-post 5-minute indicative real-time prices, the ones that can be the least accurate when you need them. Now, some of the areas where there was a few concerns or questions raised, as I said earlier, the exact dollar amounts that would apply to these default scarcity pricing values, so we're going to consult further on that. But that shouldn't be taken as suggesting that we might remove that component or weaken it in any way. The details around the fact that these default scarcity pricing blocks would bind, meaning instructing emergency load shedding before some potentially higher price generation or dispatchable demand. The system operators, so we said in the proposal that there's no need to change the system operators' processes for instructing distributors to shed load in these circumstances. Similar to the questions around how the load forecast works, we're going to work with the system operator to give some improved clarity on how exactly that does work. There was some concern around removing the cumulative price limit, but we see no reason to change that position. And we just wanted to clarify that the limit today does not guarantee lower prices. It just stops the process of administratively overriding what those prices are, nor does it act to restrain the financial impact of shortage. So in hindsight, perhaps we could have elaborated on that in more detail in the consultation paper, so we'll do that in the decision paper. One of the aspects we'll talk about later is removing the current intervention for high spring washer pricing situations. As I said, also what prices would apply when we do partially relax reserve cover ahead of using emergency load shedding. A process for manual pricing errors, when a pricing error is claimed manually, we propose that would be investigated by the system operator, and we believe that's upheld. We just want to clarify that the authority will decide the outcome of that pricing error claim based on that report from the system operator, which is actually in practice exactly what happens today. So there were a couple of elements that did not receive strong support or where there were better alternatives were suggested. So I guess really there's just the two. Our proposal for a dispatchable demand light for small purchases didn't get a lot of support, yet at the same time at least one submitter was requesting that distributed generation should also be able to use that approach. And as I said at the start, we initially proposed just having a manual pricing error claim, but it was pretty clear most people thought we should automate as much of that check as possible. To sum up then, most of the core design elements have been upheld. Some have been reworked and improved based on your feedback, or at least we've carefully considered your feedback and concluded that the original proposal was correct. And a few of them will be deferred to secondary consultation where we can work through more of those details.